It had been one of those long, dragging evenings that only college campuses seem to produce. You know the kind, fluorescent-lit classrooms, the buzz of a projector fan, a group presentation that went way too long because someone insisted on reading their entire section word for word from a crumpled paper. I was the last to go, my part rushed, my voice quiet, and my hands clammy as I stumbled through my final slide. By the time I packed up my bag and stepped out into the hallway, the building had already started to empty. The echo of my sneakers on linoleum was the only sound following me to the front entrance. I pushed the heavy glass door open and immediately regretted not checking the weather. It was pouring. Not just the light drizzle you could power walk through with your hood up. No, this was a full-on downpour. Angry rain. The kind that slapped the pavement and made rivers in the gutters. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me, digging into my pocket for my phone. Dead. Of course. I was supposed to catch the 9:45 bus. A glance at the street confirmed what I already knew. It had come and gone. And judging by the empty sidewalk and the way the campus shuttle had stopped running hours ago, there weren't any second chances tonight. I stood there under the half-extended awning outside the building, watching puddles gather at my feet. For a moment, I considered walking home, but I lived off campus, and the thought of soaking through every layer of clothing on the 45-minute trek made my chest tighten with dread. I shifted awkwardly, debating whether to go back inside and do what exactly? Camp in the hallway overnight? That's when I heard the familiar voice. You waiting for someone? I turned a little too fast and saw him, Professor Halden. He was locking up the side entrance to the faculty offices, umbrella already folded under one arm. He was wearing a dark gray overcoat, with rain droplets glistening along the shoulders. Even in the low campus lighting, he looked put together, calm, completely unfazed by the weather or the hour. I swallowed. No, just missed the bus. He nodded like that explained everything. It happens. He looked around, then back at me. Do you live far? Off campus? I mumbled, hugging my bag closer. About 40 minutes by foot. I was gonna figure something out. He raised an eyebrow at that. In this. He gestured to the wall of rain between us and the street. You'll be drenched within 5 minutes. I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. It's okay. I don't mind the rain. A soft laugh escaped him, not mocking, just amused. I used to say that too back when I was your age. Then I got sick and missed a week of midterms. He paused. Come on. I'll drive you. I don't live far from campus anyway. It's no trouble. My stomach twisted. Was this okay? I mean, yeah, we'd had some conversations before. He was my literature professor. We'd spoken about a book I loved once after class, and once he'd complimented one of my essays. But I wasn't sure if this crossed some invisible line. Was it weird? Would he expect something? Was I reading into it? I appreciate it, but I don't want to impose, I said, forcing a polite smile. I'll figure something out, really? His expression didn't change, just softened. You're not imposing. I'd feel worse knowing you're walking home in this mess. I looked away, down at the wet sidewalk, then back up. His eyes weren't demanding or pushy, just patient, warm. Still, something in me hesitated. I'd never been good at accepting help. Not from family, not from friends. Definitely not from a man who seemed so collected. Okay, I said finally, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. If you're sure. I wouldn't offer if I wasn't. He smiled, not too wide, just enough to make my nerves settle a bit. We walked in silence to his car, a clean, older model sedan parked near the faculty lot. He unlocked it with a beep and held the passenger door open for me like a gentleman from another era. I climbed in, my soaked shoes squeaking against the floor mat. As he pulled out of the lot, windshield wipers clicking rhythmically, I stared out at the empty campus. The world looked blurry through the rain, like everything had softened, faded a bit at the edges. I wasn't sure why my heart was beating so fast. Maybe it was the way his voice sounded over the hum of the heater, or the subtle scent of cologne lingering on his coat. Or maybe it was just the strange intimacy of being alone with someone you'd only ever seen behind a desk. I didn't know it then, but this night, this missed bus, this quiet ride, would change everything. And not in the way I expected. The hum of the engine and the steady swish of the windshield wipers filled the silence at first. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, arms crossed tightly, like I could make myself smaller and somehow less noticeable. The rain blurred the world outside into watercolor streaks, buildings melting into trees, streetlights glowing like candles behind a fogged window. Professor Halden didn't say much at first. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally adjusting the heat. He wasn't forcing conversation. That, in itself, helped me breathe a little easier. But silence can only stretch so far before someone has to pull on it. "You handled that presentation well, by the way," he said softly, eyes still on the road. I blinked, caught off guard. "Really?" I felt like I was rushing. "You were," he replied with a small grin. But in a charming way, felt honest. "You didn't hide behind the slides." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, half a laugh slipping out. I thought my voice was shaking the whole time. He glanced at me for a moment, then back to the road. Confidence isn't about sounding perfect. It's about standing there anyway. I looked out the window, hiding my smile in the glass. He had a way of saying things, simple things that landed in my chest like truth. A few beats passed. Then I asked, "Were you always confident? Like, when you were in school?" That made him laugh. Really laugh. A low, warm sound that filled the small car. "God, no. I was a disaster. Awkward. Anxious. Wore a corduroy blazer because I thought it made me look academic." I turned toward him. "Please tell me there are pictures." "Oh, there are," he said with mock horror. "Burned into the yearbook forever." We both chuckled, and just like that, something shifted. The tension I'd been holding in my shoulders began to melt, bit by bit, like ice under warm water. He wasn't just a professor anymore, not in that moment. He was a person, a once awkward student, a man who had stories of his own. "You always wanted to teach?" I asked. "For a while," he said, his tone softening. "I liked the idea of making books feel real to people. When I was younger, literature was my escape hatch, the only place I felt like myself. Teaching was a way to give that back." I nodded. "That makes sense." "And you?" he asked. "What brought you into English Lit? I don't get many students your age who genuinely care about character arcs and unreliable narrators." I hesitated, then shrugged. Books helped me figure myself out. When everything felt loud at home or confusing in my head, reading was quiet, safe. His eyes flicked toward me again, this time longer. "That's beautifully put." I flushed a little and looked back down at my hands. My sleeves were damp at the cuffs. The rain had gotten worse. Sheets of it slammed against the windshield. Headlights shimmered against the flooded road. "Looks like it's not letting up anytime soon," he said, squinting slightly as he slowed down. "Do you have anyone at home waiting up for you?" I shook my head. "No. I live alone." Another quiet beat. "Well," he said, voice casual but kind, "my place is closer than yours. We could wait out the worst of the storm. Dry off. I'll make tea or something." My stomach twisted. I didn't know what I was expecting, but the invitation caught me off guard. I turned my head toward him slowly. I don't want to be a bother." "You wouldn't be." His tone was gentle, reassuring. "You're already soaked, and I'd rather not feel responsible for you catching pneumonia. I really don't want to impose." "You're not." He glanced at me, and his voice dropped slightly, softer, but firmer. "Look, I get that it might feel strange, but my intentions are good. I'd never put you in a situation that wasn't safe or respectful." That caught me. He didn't say "I promise" or "trust me" in a performative way. He just said it, like someone who'd thought about boundaries, someone who meant them. I looked back out the window, then back at him. "Okay," I said quietly, "just to dry off." He nodded once, like he knew not to push further. We turned down a quieter side road, the trees heavy with water, the pavement slick. I realized as we drove that I wasn't scared. Not really, just uncertain. nervous in a way that wasn't entirely negative. He pulled into a small driveway beside a modest brick house, nothing fancy, but warm-looking. A soft porch light glowed against the wet stone. The front windows were dark. As he turned off the engine, he turned to me with a half-smile. "The tea's not great, but the blankets are." I huffed a laugh, unbuckling my seatbelt slowly. The rain still hammered down around us, but for the first time all night, I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. Instead, I followed him up the porch steps, the space between us charged with something I didn't have words for yet. Not tension, not danger, just something waiting, and I wasn't sure what scared me more, the storm outside, or the possibility that whatever was waiting inside might feel good, might feel right, might be real. The front door creaked softly as he opened it, the warm glow from a hallway lamp spilling out onto the porch like a welcome mat. I stepped inside, hesitant at first, my damp shoes squeaking on the hardwood. His home was different than I expected. I'd imagined something cold or minimal, like a professor's office, sterile and filled with filing cabinets. But this place was soft, personal, cozy. A faint scent of bergamot tea and old paper lingered in the air. Books lined the walls in mismatched shelves, organized more by memory than system. A throw blanket lay crumpled over the arm of a deep couch, and a stack of vinyl records rested beside an old record player near the window. I hovered near the door, unsure of what to do with my dripping self. "You can leave your shoes there," he said gently, hanging his coat on a hook. "I'll grab you a towel and something dry." Before I could protest, he disappeared down the hallway. I looked around again, a framed photo of what looked like him in his 20s, standing on a foggy mountainside. A postcard from Paris, stuck to the fridge with a magnet that said "Read banned books." A soft jazz melody played faintly from a speaker in another room, so subtle I hadn't noticed until now. I let out a breath and sank slightly against the wall. Everything about this place felt lived in, quiet, and full of stories, like him. When he returned, he held out a towel and a neatly folded t-shirt and sweatpants. "They'll be big on you," he said with a half-smile. "But at least they're dry." "Thanks," I said, quietly but sincerely. He pointed to the bathroom down the hall. I slipped inside, closing the door gently behind me. The mirror above the sink showed a version of myself that looked out of place here. Soaked hair, damp hoodie clinging to my frame, skin blotchy from cold and nerves. I peeled off my wet clothes, toweled off, and pulled on the shirt and pants. They smelled like clean cotton and something else, subtle cologne, maybe comfort. When I came back out, he was in the kitchen, pouring hot water into 2 mugs. "Chamomile okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, walking over and sitting at the edge of the couch, unsure how casual I was allowed to be. I felt like a guest in someone's dream, present, but fragile. He joined me, handing me a mug. "Sorry about the mismatched cups," he said lightly. "One broke in the dishwasher last week." I smiled into the steam. "I like it. It feels real." He nodded thoughtfully, then settled back in the armchair across from me. We sat in silence for a bit. Not uncomfortable, just letting the warmth settle in. Outside, the rain continued, softer now, a gentle rhythm against the windows. "I used to imagine this," I said, almost without meaning to. He looked up. "This? Being somewhere quiet, safe, not worrying about whether I fit in or said the wrong thing or if I was just too weird to be noticed." He didn't rush to respond, just watched me, letting me keep going. I think I've always felt like I was in the background. Even in high school, people knew my name but not who I was. And in college, it's like, I'm a blur in every room. I swallowed. Sometimes I wonder if anyone would notice if I just stopped showing up. The words hung there, heavier than I meant them to be. I looked down at my tea, heart pounding, suddenly regretting the honesty. But when he spoke, his voice was soft, steady. "I would." I blinked and looked up. He wasn't saying it as a compliment, not as a rescue, just a truth. "I notice you," he added. "Not just because you write beautifully or because you ask good questions when no one else does, but because you see things, you listen, you care. That's rare." My throat tightened, emotion catching me off guard. I nodded once, eyes burning slightly. "Thank you," I whispered. He leaned back in his chair and the silence returned, but it felt different now. Fuller. Like we'd cleared a space between us where something meaningful could settle. A record crackled softly as the next song played. Slow, instrumental, rich with warmth. After a while, he said, "I don't think people talk enough about loneliness." I looked at him. He stared out the window, mug cradled in both hands. "I spent years pretending I didn't feel it," he said. "Telling myself I was independent, private, focused on work. But I think I was just afraid no one would want to come close." A long pause. He glanced at me. "Sometimes even when you build a good life, it still feels empty." My chest ached at the recognition, at the honesty. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. I stayed on the couch, he stayed in the armchair, and the music wrapped around us like a blanket neither of us had to ask for. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was intimate, safe, real. I think that night something shifted quietly, like a door cracked open inside me. One I hadn't realized I'd kept locked for years. Not because I didn't want someone to come in, but because I never believed anyone would want to. And here he was, not pushing, not asking, just being there, with me. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The storm outside had calmed to a steady patter now, no longer furious, just persistent. Inside, the house had fallen into that soft, late-night quiet where time stretches and everything feels suspended, as if the world outside had forgotten about us. We sat for a while longer talking about books and movies, safe topics, gentle ground. But even within the calm, something was shifting. It started with a glance. I just made a comment about how much I loved The Secret History, and he smiled, really smiled, and held my gaze a beat too long. Not a classroom smile. Not the kind meant for students. No, this one was different. It carried something quieter, something that lingered. Curious, kind, warm. My heart thumped once, hard. I dropped my eyes to the tea in my hands. Then there was the mug. I stood to bring it to the kitchen, but he took a step toward me at the same time. We nearly bumped into each other, and his hand brushed mine as I passed it to him. It was barely a touch, a passing graze of fingers, but it felt like fire, sharp and electric. I pulled back reflexively. His eyes flicked up to mine. That smile again, not cocky, not assuming, just open, and maybe searching. I offered a quick, awkward laugh and turned away too fast. What was I doing? What was this? He walked ahead of me into the kitchen and placed the mugs in the sink. I followed slowly, watching the line of his shoulders, the way his hand lingered under the warm tap. He dried his hands on a towel and leaned back against the counter, looking at me with a softness that made my throat tighten. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired." "You don't have to stay up if you don't want to," he said. "There's a pull-out couch in the study. Fresh sheets, I promise." His voice was kind, always kind, but it carried something under it tonight. Like maybe he was trying not to say more than he should. Like maybe I wasn't imagining the shift between us. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, suddenly unsure of how to exist in my own skin. He looked at me again, and I felt it, that flicker. Not intense, not overwhelming, just the kind of heat that builds slowly under your skin. Quiet like the space between two breaths. "I'm gonna, just use the bathroom again," I muttered. "Of course." I ducked down the hall, away from his gaze, and closed the bathroom door behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding too loud in the quiet. The mirror was unforgiving. My hair was a mess. The borrowed shirt was too big, the sleeves hanging awkwardly off my wrists. I looked like someone trying to disappear into borrowed fabric. But my face gave it away. Flushed cheeks, wide eyes, a pulse tapping visibly at the base of my throat. I gripped the sink. Was I reading too much into this? Maybe he was just being nice. Maybe this was just how some people looked at others when they cared, when they wanted to be supportive. He was my professor. Even if he wasn't teaching me this semester, there were rules, unspoken perhaps, but still real. Still, I couldn't stop remembering the way his eyes softened when I talked, or the way his voice lowered just slightly when he said my name. The way he leaned a little closer, as if whatever I said mattered more than I thought it did. I let out a shaky breath and stared at myself, at the nervous boy in the mirror pretending to be composed. It wasn't like I hadn't thought about him before. I had, more than once. His calm demeanor, the quiet intelligence, the way he moved through the world like someone who'd stopped trying to impress anyone years ago. But those thoughts were always private, distant, fleeting. Now they didn't feel so distant anymore. But what if I ruined it? What if this was just kindness and I was projecting desire into the gaps between words? I splashed cold water on my face, trying to chase the blush from my cheeks. It didn't help. If anything, the shock of it only made my thoughts swirl faster. I leaned against the sink and closed my eyes. I didn't want to leave. Not yet. I didn't want to cross a line either. I didn't even know where the line was anymore. After a moment, I straightened up, dried my face with the towel, and stepped back into the hallway. The lights had been dimmed slightly, the jazz record now replaced with something softer, almost classical, something that hummed in the background like a lullaby. He was standing near the record player, adjusting the volume. He turned when he heard me, his expression unreadable for a moment, then soft. "I set up the couch," he said, nodding toward the small study off the hallway. "There's extra pillows in the closet if you need them." I nodded, unsure of what to say. He walked past me slowly, close enough to brush shoulders, but he didn't touch me, just offered a small, knowing smile and disappeared into the kitchen again, giving me space. Part of me wanted to follow him. The other part, the bigger part, was still trembling, still unsure of what I was allowed to want. So instead, I stood in the quiet hallway of a stranger's house. A man I was starting to feel wasn't a stranger at all, and tried to make peace with the unspoken tension wrapping around us both. It was delicate, beautiful, dangerous, and I didn't know what would happen next. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a full minute, pretending to consider heading into the guest room. But I wasn't ready to sleep, not with the way the air still felt, still humming with something unsaid. I padded slowly into the living room again, barefoot now, the oversized sweatpants he'd loaned me barely clinging to my hips. The soft light pooled around the couch and bookshelves, casting everything in a honey-warm glow. The storm outside had softened into a whisper, more of a lullaby than a threat now. He was sitting on the couch again, one arm resting along the back, a mug, now refilled, cradled in his hands. He looked up as I entered. "You okay?" he asked, voice low and gentle. I nodded at first, then paused. "Yeah, just not sleepy yet." He tilted his head slightly. "Mind if I keep you company a little longer?" I shook my head. "No, I'd like that." I sat down across from him again, curling my legs underneath me, feeling the weight of the moment settle softly between us. We didn't speak for a while. The record had stopped, but neither of us moved to change it. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was full of breath, of heartbeat, of presence. Eventually, he broke the silence. "You seem like someone who carries a lot inside," he said, not looking at me directly. More like he was offering the observation to the room. I looked down, picking at a loose thread on the sleeve of the shirt he'd given me. "I guess I do." He waited a moment, then said, "You don't have to talk about it, of course. But I'm here, if you ever want to." There was no pressure in his tone, no tug, no lean in, just space. And for some reason, that made the words come easier. "I've always been kind of invisible," I said. Not in a tragic, poor-me way, just in the quiet way, the unnoticed kind. He turned to face me more fully, his expression softening. I think part of me stopped trying after a while, to fit in, to be seen. It was easier to just be quiet, polite, forgettable. I swallowed. But lately, I don't know. Lately I've been wondering if I even know who I am, or if I've just become what's safest. He sat with that, letting it sink into the air around us. His eyes were on me now, not heavy, but steady. "I've been there," he said. "You?" I looked at him, surprised. He smiled faintly. You'd be shocked at how many professors started as quiet students. I was one of them, always in the back row, always reading ahead, never raising my hand unless called on. I thought being smart would make me seen, but really, it just made me easier to overlook. That surprised me. He always seemed so composed, so in control. What changed? I asked. He exhaled through his nose, like the answer was heavier than he could fully explain. Time, experience, faking it mostly, and eventually realizing I had a choice. Either keep hiding or risk being misunderstood in order to be known. He glanced at me again. I still struggle with that sometimes, especially when it comes to relationships. My breath caught slightly. Yeah, he nodded. It's hard, being in this role. There's always that line you can't cross, or aren't supposed to, and after a while it gets easier to just stay alone. To pretend that wanting connection is something you outgrow. I felt something flicker inside me. Recognition. Sadness. Hope. How long has it been? I asked before I could stop myself. He chuckled softly. Too long. Years, actually. And not because I didn't want it, but because I convinced myself I didn't deserve it. That last part settled heavily in my chest. Why not? I asked. He took a slow sip of his tea, then set it down. Because I thought I had to be everything to everyone. Respected. Responsible. Above temptation. Above feeling too much. He gave a small shrug. But lately I've realized that kind of life is just another kind of hiding. I looked at him for a long moment, unsure how to respond. Not because I didn't know what I felt, but because I felt too much, and I didn't trust my voice. So instead, I whispered, I've never really felt seen. The words came out like a confession, and then silence. He turned toward me more fully this time. Not close, not looming, just there, present. And then he said simply, quietly, I see you. I didn't move, didn't speak. My chest was tight, and my throat burned, and my hands were trembling a little. Because I believed him. He wasn't saying it to be kind or careful. He was saying it like he meant it, like he couldn't not say it. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I had to shrink. I didn't feel like I had to pretend. I just felt here, with him. I blinked fast, trying to push the tears back down. I'm sorry, I said, half laughing, wiping my eyes. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. He shook his head gently. Don't be sorry. You don't have to explain your feelings here. We sat in that moment, the silence fuller than ever. No kiss. No declarations. Just two people finally laying down the weight they'd carried too long, and finding someone who'd been walking the same road in parallel. Not rescuing. Not rushing. Just seeing. And for now, that was more than enough. At some point, I'm not even sure when, the clock on the wall began blinking midnight. I noticed it in the quiet, after our last long pause. After the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward anymore. Just full. The kind where words weren't necessary, and presence said enough. Still, I shifted on the couch and glanced toward the hallway. I could feel it coming, the inevitable return to the real world. The moment the spell would break. I should probably go to bed, I said, my voice soft, not entirely convinced. Professor Halden, Aaron, as he'd told me to call him hours earlier, though I'd barely dared to, gave me a small nod, but there was something unreadable behind it. Not disappointment, not surprise, just a quiet pause. He stood too. I'll walk you to the guest room, he offered, or to the door, if you'd rather head home. I hesitated, standing slowly. My body felt lighter than usual, like I wasn't quite grounded. It's still raining, I said, trying to smile. I wouldn't get far. He returned the smile just barely. No, probably not. We walked together down the hallway, not to the guest room, to the front door. I didn't know why I moved that way. Maybe I just needed a breath of air. Maybe I needed the space to feel like I had a choice. He opened the door slightly, letting in the cool, damp air. The porch light cast a soft glow on the puddles outside. The night was quiet now. Still, we stood there side by side. He turned to me then, and said it with the kind of gentleness that held the weight of everything unspoken between us. "You don't have to go yet, unless you want to." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a trap. It was an offering. A pause. I looked up at him. His face was calm, but there was vulnerability there too. Like he was giving me every chance to say no, to pull away, to leave with dignity and without pressure. But I didn't want to leave. I didn't want this to be something I remembered later with regret, wondering what might have happened if I'd stayed just a little longer. "I don't want to go," I said quietly. He nodded just once and closed the door. For a moment we just stood there, inches apart. My breath hitched, and then, slowly, his hand reached up. Not grabbing, not rushing, just resting gently along the side of my face. Warm and steady. I leaned into it. Our eyes met, and this time I didn't look away. He bent down, just enough for our foreheads to touch, and then, after a long, still moment, his lips brushed against mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't movie perfect. It was quiet, careful, honest, like everything else between us had been. His hand moved to the back of my neck as the kiss deepened just slightly, and I felt myself exhale into it, letting go of 1,000 things I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Fear, doubt, loneliness, all of it. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes searched mine, not asking for more, not assuming anything, just checking. I smiled. He did too. He stepped back slightly, gesturing toward the couch. "Stay a little longer?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation this time. We returned to the living room. Something between us softened now, unguarded. He sat beside me this time, not across the room. I leaned into the corner of the couch, knees pulled up, and he turned slightly toward me, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. We didn't talk about the kiss. We didn't need to. Instead, we talked about stupid things. Favorite childhood books. First CDs. How bad we were at cooking. How college hadn't turned out quite the way either of us had imagined it would. For different reasons, and yet somehow the same. At one point, he leaned back, head tilted against the cushion, eyes half-lidded. "I never thought I'd have a night like this," he murmured. "Not anymore." I looked at him, heart full. Me neither. We sat like that for hours. Every so often our shoulders touched, then our hands. Then our fingers curled quietly around each other, like they'd been waiting a lifetime to do so. There was no rush, no plans, just breath and time, and the occasional sound of rain tapping the window like a lullaby. At one point, I rested my head on his shoulder. He didn't move. He just placed his hand over mine and held it there. The warmth of him, the quiet of the room, the security in his presence. It made the world outside feel far away, irrelevant. When I finally began to drift toward sleep, it was with a smile on my face and his arm around my shoulder, steady and protective. It wasn't the kiss that changed everything. It was the silence that followed, the closeness, the trust. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a student. I didn't feel like a guest. I felt chosen, wanted, seen. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I woke to the scent of something warm, toasted bread, maybe, and coffee. The light in the room was soft and golden, filtered through the slats of the blinds like sunlight had arrived cautiously, unsure if it was welcome. For a second, I forgot where I was. The couch was still beneath me. The blanket I'd pulled over myself tangled around my legs. The house was quiet, except for the occasional soft clink of dishes and the low hum of a morning playlist drifting from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, stretching. My heart beat with a slow, calm rhythm. Not the rapid flutter of uncertainty from the night before, but something steadier now, grounded. When I padded into the kitchen, he was standing barefoot at the stove, wearing a soft gray t-shirt and plaid pajama pants that looked as old and comfortable as the house itself. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled when he saw me. "Good morning," he said, voice still wrapped in sleep. "Morning," I replied, my own voice raspier than usual. "Something smells amazing. Don't get too excited," he chuckled. "It's just toast, eggs, and the worst coffee I've ever made. But I had to try." I laughed, not out of politeness, but because I genuinely felt light. He nodded toward the small kitchen table. Sit. You're a guest. Even if you're wearing my sweatpants. I slid into the seat, the sunlight warming my back. A moment later, he placed a simple plate in front of me and set down 2 mugs of coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like more care had gone into it than any meal I'd had in months. We ate in a kind of easy quiet, the kind that only comes after a wall has already been taken down. There was no pressure to talk, no urgency to fill the silence. Just the soft sound of utensils, the birds outside waking up, and the rain having finally decided to rest. When I'd cleared half my plate, he looked over at me with a thoughtful expression. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. I paused, then answered honestly. "Peaceful. A little overwhelmed, maybe, but safe." He smiled at that. "Good." Another pause, then he set down his fork. "I want to talk about last night," he said, his tone steady. "Not because I regret anything. I don't. But because I think we both deserve to move forward with clarity." I nodded, grateful. He went on, "I know the dynamic between us has been, until now, teacher and student. Even if I'm not currently grading you or teaching your class, I'm still aware of the weight that carries. So I want you to know nothing that happened or might happen will ever be used against you or come with expectations." I swallowed. "I didn't feel like you were pressuring me. Not at all." "I know," he said, "but it's important to say out loud. For both our sakes." He took a breath. "This isn't about power or roles or crossing lines. It's about honesty, about care, about the fact that, for whatever reason, when I'm around you, I feel more human, more seen." My chest tightened. "I feel that too," I said. "With you, I don't feel small, or like I have to edit myself." He reached across the table, resting his hand over mine. The gesture was simple, but it felt enormous. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, "but I'd like to keep seeing you, not just here or in private. I want to build something that's rooted in trust, in choice." I nodded, heart full. "Me too." The words surprised even me. Not because I didn't mean them, but because I hadn't realized how deeply I wanted to mean them. We sat like that for a while, hands intertwined on the table, morning light spilling in over cracked ceramic and coffee rings. Eventually, I glanced at the clock. "I should head out soon," I said. "I've got a shift this afternoon." He nodded but didn't let go of my hand just yet. "Want me to drive you?" I smiled. "Only if the coffee doesn't put you back to sleep behind the wheel." He laughed. That low, warm laugh I was quickly becoming addicted to. When we stood, he handed me my now dry clothes from the night before, neatly folded, and gave me the bathroom again to change. I hesitated when I caught my reflection. I looked different, not outwardly, but inside. I felt like I'd been cracked open gently, in the best way, like someone had turned on a light I didn't know I had. When I stepped back into the living room, he was standing by the door, keys in hand. I crossed to him, and before either of us could overthink it, we kissed again, soft, slow, intentional. Not a goodbye, a beginning. As we pulled apart, he whispered, "You don't have to disappear after this." I smiled. I wasn't planning to. He opened the door, and we stepped out into the pale morning light. The storm had passed, but something else had just begun. Weeks passed, quietly at first. Like the changing of a season you don't notice until one morning you wake up and realize the leaves have turned gold. What started as one unexpected night became something steady. Not dramatic, not rushed, just real. We kept things discreet. Not because we were ashamed, but because we knew what people would say. Classrooms have rules. Departments have opinions. But what we had wasn't born in a breach of trust. It was built on it. Aaron, I could call him that now without hesitation, never treated me like someone fragile. He never held our connection above my head like it came with strings or consequences. He listened. He laughed with me. He challenged me. And I changed. I started raising my hand more in class, not his but others. I joined a campus writing group. I turned in my essays with confidence instead of anxiety. People noticed, too. One of my classmates even asked if I had started seeing someone. I smiled and just said, Something like that. He and I found rhythms that worked. Late-night coffees, early morning texts, the occasional quiet dinner at his house where we sat on the couch and read together, our legs brushing, our hearts full in that kind of quiet way that doesn't need a soundtrack. He never made promises he couldn't keep. He never said too much too soon. But every time he looked at me, I could feel the truth in it, the way he chose me each time with care. And slowly I began to choose myself too. One afternoon in late October, he met me just off campus. A small park lined with maple trees, their leaves glowing orange and red under the slanted autumn light. It had been a long week, and I texted him, half joking, I could really use a walk and a distraction. He didn't hesitate. We met by the pond. He brought 2 cups of cider from the local cafe, both too hot to drink but perfect to hold. We didn't talk much at first. We just walked. Leaves crunched beneath our feet. The air was crisp and clean. It smelled like wood smoke and endings, the kind that make room for new things. At one point, he reached for my hand without a word, and I let him. There was something about that, the simplicity of it, that undid me, because I'd spent so long wondering if anyone would ever really see me. Not the polite version of me, not the academic me, not the quiet, good student who faded into the back row, but the one who loved fiercely, who felt deeply, who wanted more than just to pass through life unnoticed. And now here I was, walking hand in hand with a man who saw all of that and stayed. He looked over at me as we reached the edge of the pond. The trees reflected in the water like a painting. The wind blew gently, catching the edge of his coat and tugging a leaf into his hair. I reached up and brushed it away. Thanks, he said, voice barely above the breeze. For what? I asked. For trusting me, he said. For giving this a chance. You could have walked away that night. I shook my head. I think I almost did. But something told me to stay. He smiled. I'm glad you did. We stood there a while longer, the world moving slowly around us. And in my chest, something settled. Not the fluttering nervousness of a first kiss, or the dizzy rush of falling, but the quiet certainty of being home. I looked down at our joined hands. Then I looked back at him. I used to think that night was a mistake, I said quietly. That missing the bus meant I screwed up my routine, messed up my timing. I was frustrated, cold, tired. He raised an eyebrow. You were definitely tired. I smiled. But now, I realize I didn't miss something that night. I found something I didn't even know I was missing. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking at me like I mattered. So I said it. I found someone who saw me, who understood me, and who chose me. He brought our joined hands to his lips and kissed my knuckles. I still do, he murmured. We didn't need to talk about the future that day. We didn't need to plan what came next. Because this moment was enough. Enough to hold on to. Enough to grow from. And as we turned back toward the path, walking side by side, fingers laced and heart steady, I thought about how life rarely unfolds the way we expect. But sometimes it gives us exactly what we need. Even if it arrives in the form of a missed bus, a borrowed sweatshirt, and a quiet night in a stranger's home that becomes so much more. Love didn't come rushing into my life with fireworks and declarations. Came softly, came patiently, and it stayed. What would you have done that night? Would you have stayed in the rain? Or stepped inside like he did? Tell me. Do you believe real love can start in the most unexpected places? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on their story.